She had waited her whole life for this day. But when the train pulled in, the man she was supposed to marry wasn't on it. Instead, a stranger lay dying at her feet, and without thinking, she reached for him. The afternoon sun burned hot over Dust Mere, Wyoming, baking the dry earth until it cracked. Clara Bennett stood alone on the wooden train platform, her fingers nervously smoothing the worn fabric of her dress. She had spent the last of her coins on this journey, leaving behind the crowded tenements of St. Louis for the promise of a new beginning. Cyrus Halstead's letters had spoken of open skies, clean air, and a home where she would never again feel like a burden. She had memorized every word he'd written. You will have your own room. No one will trouble you here. This land needs a woman's touch. Clara had clung to those words through the long train ride west, through the stares of other passengers who wondered why a young woman traveled alone. She had kept her head down, her small bag of belongings clutched tightly in her lap. Now, as the distant whistle of the train echoed across the plains, her pulse quickened. This was it, the moment her life would change. The train screeched to a stop, steam hissing from its great metal wheels. Clara held her breath as passengers began to step down, a well-dressed merchant with a gold watch, a tired-looking mother herding 2 children, a pair of cowboys laughing too loudly. Her eyes darted from face to face, searching for a man who might match the description Cyrus had given. Older, stern but kind, a rancher's build. But no one looked at her. No one stopped. The platform emptied. The conductor called the all aboard. Still, Cyrus Halstead did not appear. A cold knot formed in Clara's stomach. Had she misunderstood the date? Had he forgotten? Or worse, had he seen her from a distance and changed his mind? She swallowed hard, forcing back the sting of tears. She would not cry. She had survived worse than this. Then, just as the train gave one final lurch forward, a door at the very end flew open. A body tumbled out, landing hard on the platform with a sickening thud. Clara gasped. The man didn't move. For a heartbeat, no one else seemed to notice. The train rolled away, leaving only dust and silence behind. Then a woman shrieked, and suddenly people were backing away, murmuring in alarm. Clara didn't stop to think. She ran forward, her skirts tangling around her legs as she dropped to her knees beside the fallen man. Up close, he was a mess of blood and dirt. His shirt was torn, his face swollen from beating. One of his hands twitched as if he were trying, and failing, to push himself up. "Sir," Clara touched his shoulder lightly. "Can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered, but he didn't speak. A dark stain spread beneath him, seeping into the warped wood of the platform. "Someone fetch the doctor," Clara called, but the few remaining onlookers only shook their heads. "Ain't no doctor for drifters," muttered an old man, spitting tobacco into the dust. Clara's jaw tightened. Without another word, she hooked her arms under the stranger's shoulders and heaved. He was heavy, so heavy, but fear gave her strength. Gritting her teeth, she managed to drag him upright enough to slump against her. Every step was agony. His weight made her legs tremble. Sweat trickled down her back as she staggered forward, one slow shuffle at a time. The boarding house where she'd rented a room was only 3 streets away, but it might as well have been miles. "Almost there," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if it was for him or for herself. People stared as she passed. A woman pulled her child closer. A man in a bowler hat frowned, but didn't offer help. Clara kept her eyes forward, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. By the time she reached the narrow staircase leading to her room, her arms burned with exhaustion. She half carried, half dragged the man up each step, her vision blurring at the edges. At last, she shouldered open the door and collapsed with him onto the thin mattress in the corner. The room was small, just a bed, a wash basin, and a single chair, but it was clean. Clara rushed toward a rag, then returned to kneel beside the stranger. Gently, she wiped the blood from his face, revealing a strong jaw beneath the bruises. His skin was too warm. Fever, maybe, or infection. She didn't know much about doctoring, but she knew enough to clean his wounds. Tearing strips from her spare petticoat, she bandaged the worst of the cuts, her hands steady despite the way her heart hammered. Who was he? What had happened to him? And why had he been on that train? The man groaned, his fingers twitching again. Clara leaned closer. "Don't try to move," she said softly. "You're safe now." His lips parted, but no sound came out. Then his eyes rolled back, and he was still once more. Clara sat back on her heels, pressing a hand to her own racing heart. Outside, the wind rattled the window pane. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. She had come west to marry a stranger. Now she was nursing one instead. The wind howled outside Clara's small room as the first drops of rain began to fall. The wooden walls creaked, and the single oil lamp flickered, casting long shadows across the wounded man's face. He hadn't stirred since she had brought him in, but his breathing was uneven, too fast, then too slow. She pressed the back of her hand to his forehead and winced. Burning up. Clara had little to work with, just the herbs she carried in her small tin and the clean rags she had torn from her spare petticoat. She dipped a cloth in cool water and pressed it to his brow, whispering a prayer under her breath. "Lord, I don't know who this man is, but don't let him die in my care." The storm grew louder, rain drumming against the roof like impatient fingers. A gust of wind rattled the window, and Clara jumped, her nerves already stretched thin. She had never been afraid of storms before, but tonight felt different, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The man moaned, his head tossing weakly on the thin pillow. His lips moved, but no words came out, just broken sounds, like a man lost in a nightmare. Clara leaned closer. "Sure," she murmured, smoothing his sweat-dampened hair back from his face. "You're all right. Just rest." But he wasn't all right. His skin was too hot, his breath too shallow. She needed help. Wrapping her shawl tight around her shoulders, Clara stepped out into the storm. The rain soaked through her dress in seconds as she ran down the muddy street toward the doctor's house. She pounded on the door until a tired-eyed man in a rumpled coat finally opened it. "What's the trouble?" he grumbled. "There's a man sick, maybe dying in my room," Clara said, breathless. "He needs help." The doctor sighed, rubbing his beard. "You the one who dragged in that drifter from the train?" Clara nodded. "Ain't much I can do for folks like that," he said. "If he wakes, give him water. If he don't, well, the undertaker's on 3rd Street. Clara's stomach twisted. "You won't even look at him." The doctor shrugged. "Waste of time. Men like that don't last long." Clara clenched her fists, but didn't argue. She turned and ran back through the rain, her heart pounding harder than before. When she returned to the room, the man was worse. His body trembled, his fingers clawing at the blanket like he was trying to fight something unseen. Clara rushed to his side, pressing another cool cloth to his forehead. "Listen to me," she said firmly, though she wasn't sure he could hear. "You're not dying tonight. Do you understand?" He didn't answer, but she kept talking anyway. Soft words, nonsense words, anything to fill the silence between the thunder. She told him about the farm she'd grown up on, about the way the sunrise looked over the fields back home. She didn't know why she was saying these things, only that she needed him to hold on. Hours passed. The storm raged, and slowly, ever so slowly, his breathing evened out. By morning, the fever had broken. Clara slumped in the chair beside the bed, exhausted but relieved. The man still hadn't spoken, hadn't even opened his eyes fully, but he was alive, and for now that was enough. News traveled fast in a town like Dustmere. By the time Clara stepped outside the next morning, she could feel the stares. Women whispered behind their hands as she passed. Men tipped their hats, but didn't meet her eyes. Even the shopkeeper gave her a long look when she bought bread and broth, as if trying to decide whether to serve her at all. Clara kept her chin up, let them talk. She had done nothing wrong. Still, her hands shook as she carried the food back to her room. The man John, she had started calling him in her head, was sitting up when she returned, leaning heavily against the wall. His eyes were clearer now, dark and watchful. "You're awake," Clara said, setting the food down. He didn't answer, just stared at her like he was trying to figure her out. Clara handed him the bowl of broth. "You need to eat." He took it slowly, his fingers brushing against hers, for just a second. Warm, rough, a working man's hands. Clara turned away, suddenly flustered. "Do you remember what happened?" Silence. She glanced back. He was watching her again, his expression unreadable. "Can you speak?" she asked gently. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't. Then, in a voice rough from disuse, he said, "Yes." Just that one word, but it was a start. Clara nodded. "Good. That's good." She wanted to ask more. "Who are you? What happened to you?" But the look in his eyes stopped her. There was something there, something guarded, like he was used to keeping secrets. So instead, she sat in the chair beside the bed and tore off a piece of bread for herself. "Well, John," she said, "when you're ready to talk, I'll be here." His eyebrows lifted slightly at the name, but he didn't correct her. Outside, the town went about its business. But inside that small room, something unspoken passed between them, a quiet understanding. He didn't trust her yet, and maybe that was fair, because she wasn't sure she trusted him either. The days passed slowly in Dustmere, each one blending into the next like the endless stretches of prairie grass outside town. Clara fell into a rhythm, waking before dawn, checking on John, then heading out to find work. The little money she had brought with her was nearly gone, and with no word from Cyrus Halstead, she had to make do. She found odd jobs where she could, mending clothes for the mercantile owner's wife, sweeping floors at the church, even helping the elderly schoolteacher clean her small classroom. The pay was meager, but it bought food and bandages. And though John was healing, he still moved like a man carrying an unseen weight. Clara didn't press him for answers. Not yet, but she noticed the way his eyes sharpened whenever someone passed by the window, the way his hands clenched when footsteps lingered too long outside the door. He was waiting for something, or someone. Then, one afternoon, the town stirred. Clara was returning from a mercantile with a small bag of flour when she saw the crowd gathered near the sheriff's office. A stranger stood at the center, a broad-shouldered man with a sun-weathered face and a hat pulled low over his eyes. His voice carried across the dusty street. "Name's Jed Carter. I'm foreman over at the Halstead Ranch. My boss was supposed to be here days ago. Ain't like him to miss a meeting, let alone disappear." Clara's breath caught. "Halstead." The sheriff scratched his chin. "You sure he made on the train?" Jed's jaw tightened. "Paid for his ticket myself. He boarded in Cheyenne. Never got off here." A murmur ran through the crowd. Clara's fingers tightened around the flour sack. The sheriff sighed. "Well, we got no missing persons reports. Could be he changed his mind, got off somewhere else." "No." Jed's voice was firm. He was coming to meet his bride. Wouldn't have left her waiting. Clara's heart hammered, so loud, she was sure everyone could hear it. His bride. That was her. But if Cyrus Halstead had never arrived, and John had been found half dead on the same train, her stomach twisted. She forced herself to walk away before anyone noticed her standing there. But with each step, the pieces fell into place. The bruises on John's face, not just from a fall, but a beating. His silence. The way he watched the door like a hunted man. By the time she reached her room, her hand was shaking. John was sitting by the window, his profile sharp against the afternoon light. He turned when she entered, his gaze dropping to her pale face. "What's wrong?" he asked, the most words he'd strung together since waking. Clara set the flour down carefully. Then she met his eyes. "I think we need to talk about who you really are." The room was too quiet. John Cyrus didn't move, didn't speak, but something shifted in his expression, a wall crumbling, just enough for Clara to see the truth beneath. She swallowed hard. "Your foreman's in town. Jed Carter. He's looking for you." A muscle jumped in his jaw. Clara pressed on, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're Cyrus Halstead, aren't you?" For a long moment, she thought he might deny it. Then his shoulders sagged, and he let out a slow breath. "Yes." The word hung between them, heavy as stone. Clara sank into the chair by the bed, her legs suddenly weak. All this time, all those days spent tending him, worrying over him, calling him John, and he had known. He had known exactly who she was. "Why didn't you say something?" she asked. Cyrus ran a hand over his face, wincing as his fingers brushed a fading bruise. "At first, I wasn't sure where I was, or who you were. Then," he hesitated, "then I needed to know if I could trust you." Clara stiffened. "You thought I had something to do with what happened to you?" Didn't know what to think. His voice was rough. "Men jumped me on the train, took my money, my papers, left me for dead. Only reason I'm alive is because they thought I was already gone." He met her eyes. "And then I woke up here, with you." Clara's chest ached. She stood abruptly, turning toward the window so he wouldn't see the hurt in her face. "I didn't bring you here for a reward. I didn't even know who you were." "I know." The quiet certainty in his voice made her turn back. Cyrus stood slowly, bracing a hand against the wall for balance. He was still too thin, too pale, but his gaze was steady. "You saved my life, not knowing who I was, not asking for anything in return." He took a step toward her. "That means more than you know." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. "What happens now?" "Now," Cyrus exhaled. "Now I go back to my ranch. And you?" He trailed off, as if unsure what came next. Clara forced a smile. "And I move on. Don't worry, Mr. Halstead. I never expected anything from you." Something flickered in his eyes. Regret? Guilt? But before he could speak, heavy footsteps sounded on the porch outside. A fist pounded on the door. "Boss." Jed's voice boomed through the wood. "You in there?" Cyrus closed his eyes briefly, then squared his shoulders. "Yeah, Jed, I'm here." As the door swung open, Clara took a step back, suddenly feeling like an outsider in her own room. Jed's eyes widened at the sight of Cyrus, then narrowed as they darted to Clara. "What's going on?" he demanded. Cyrus held up a hand. "Later." He turned to Clara, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for everything." Then he was gone, leaning on Jed's arm as they walked away, leaving Clara standing alone in the silence. She didn't cry. She had learned long ago that tears didn't change anything. But as she picked up the discarded bandages from the floor, her hands trembled, because somehow, in the span of a single conversation, she had lost two men: the stranger she had nursed back to health, and the husband she had never met. The Halstead ranch sprawled across the valley like a kingdom, its fences cutting through the golden grass as far as the eye could see. Cyrus stood on the porch of the main house, staring out at land that had been in his family for 3 generations. It should have felt like coming home. It didn't. Everything looked the same: the barn with its peeling red paint, the windmill creaking in the afternoon breeze, the cattle dotting the distant hills. But he wasn't the same. Jed clumped up the steps behind him, handing over a cup of strong black coffee. "You gonna tell me what happened out there?" Cyrus took the cup, letting the heat seep into his palms. "Got jumped, like I said." "By who?" "Don't know." That was the bitter truth. He'd been dozing in his train car when they'd come at him. 3 men, maybe 4. He'd fought back, but they'd had the advantage of surprise. And numbers. Jed spat off the porch. "We'll find him." Cyrus shook his head. "Doesn't matter now." What mattered was the woman he'd left behind in Dustmere. The way Clara's face had looked when she realized who he was. Not angry, not greedy, just resigned, like she'd expected to be discarded all along. He took a sip of coffee, wincing as it burned his tongue. "That woman in town, Clara Bennett." Jed's eyebrows rose. "The one who patched you up?" "Yeah, she was." Cyrus hesitated. "She was the mail-order bride." Jed whistled low. "Well, I'll be." Cyrus set the cup down with a thud. "Take $50 from the strongbox. Deliver it to her tomorrow." Jed frowned. "Money? That what she wants?" "That's not the point." Cyrus ran a hand through his hair, still too short from where they'd shaved it to stitch the gash near his temple. "She saved my life, Jed. I owe her." But as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, he knew money wasn't enough. Clara hadn't taken in a dying man because she wanted payment. She'd done it because it was right. and that realization kept him awake long after the coyotes stopped howling. Clara told herself she wasn't waiting, but every time the bell above the mercantile door jingled, her head snapped up. Every time boots sounded on the boardwalk outside her rented room, her breath caught. Jed had come, just as Cyrus promised. He tried to press a fat envelope into her hands, his face solemn. From the boss. For your trouble. Clara had stepped back as if burned. I don't want his money. Jed had looked genuinely puzzled. Then what do you want? To be more than an obligation. She hadn't said it. Just shook her head and closed the door. Now, as she folded her few belongings into her worn carpetbag, she forced herself to face the truth. It was time to move on. Cyrus Halstead had his life. She needed to find hers. Her fingers brushed against a crumpled paper at the bottom of the bag. She pulled it out, smoothing the creases carefully. It was one of Cyrus's letters. Clara, he had written months ago. By the time you read this, your journey west will be arranged. I know this is not the romantic match young girls dream of, but I promise you will have a place here. A home. A purpose. She traced the words with her fingertip, her throat tight. He'd kept every promise, just not in the way either of them had expected. A knock at the door startled her. Clara shoved the letter into her pocket and opened the door, then froze. Cyrus stood on the porch, hat in hand. He looked different out here in the sunlight, stronger than he had in her sick room, but with shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. May I come in? He asked quietly. Clara stepped back without a word. He entered slowly, his gaze sweeping the nearly empty room before landing on her bag. You're leaving? Yes. Where will you go? Clara lifted one shoulder. Does it matter? Cyrus flinched as if she'd struck him. Then, to her shock, he sat heavily in the room's lone chair, his shoulders slumping. Jed said you refused the money. I didn't help you for payment. I know. He looked up, his eyes startlingly earnest. That's why I'm here. Clara waited, her pulse pounding in her ears. Cyrus took a deep breath. When I wrote those letters, I thought I was offering you something. A roof. Security. But you, his voice roughened, you gave me far more. You saw a broken man and treated him like he was worth saving. Clara's fingers found the letter in her pocket. You were worth saving. Cyrus stood abruptly, crossing the small space between them. He didn't touch her, but his nearness made the air hum. Come to the ranch, he said softly. Not because of some contract. Not for money. Come because I'd like to know the woman who didn't walk away when things got hard. Clara's breath caught. As what? His hand hovered near hers, not quite touching. As Clara. Just Clara. Outside, a wagon rattled by, the sound of everyday life continuing on. But in that small, sunlit room, something new began. Not the arranged marriage they'd planned, but something slower. Something real. Clara looked down at their almost joined hands and made her choice. I'll come, she whispered. And when Cyrus smiled, it reached his eyes for the first time. The Halstead ranch looked different in the morning light. Clara sat atop the gentle mare Jed had brought for her, taking in the rolling pastures dotted with grazing cattle, the sturdy barn with its freshly painted doors, the neat rows of crops stretching toward the distant mountains. It was beautiful, more beautiful than Cyrus's letters had described, but it was the man himself who held her attention now. Cyrus walked beside her horse, his boots kicking up little clouds of dust as he pointed out landmarks. That's where we grow the hay. The creek runs just beyond those cottonwoods. The bunkhouse is new, built it last spring. His voice was steady, but Clara noticed the way his fingers flexed at his sides, like he was nervous. She tilted her head. You're not showing me this ranch, Mr. Halstead. You're showing me your heart. Cyrus stopped walking. The mare halted beside him, blowing softly through her nostrils. For a long moment, the only sounds were the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through grass. Then Cyrus reached up, his calloused hands gentle as they helped her dismount. When her feet touched the ground, he didn't let go immediately. His palms were warm against hers. Clara Bennett, he said quietly, would you come walk this land with me? Not because I promised you a ranch and some letter, but because I want to share a life. The simplicity of the question stole her breath. No grand declarations, no promises of riches, just an honest man offering what he had. Clara studied his face, the fading bruises, the new lines around his eyes, the quiet hope in his gaze. This wasn't the stern rancher who'd written those formal letters. This was the man who'd woken feverish in her care, who'd watched her mend his shirts by lamplight, who'd learned her worth when he had nothing to offer but gratitude. Her fingers tightened around his. "Yes," she said, "but not as your charity case. As your partner." The smile that broke across Cyrus's face could have outshone the Wyoming sun. The little chapel smelled of beeswax and wildflowers. Clara stood before the simple wooden altar, her blue dress freshly pressed, her hands clasped around a small bouquet of prairie daisies. There were no bridesmaids, no flower girls, no rows of curious onlookers. Just Jed shifting awkwardly in his good suit by the door, the elderly pastor smiling benevolently, and Cyrus, her Cyrus, waiting for her with steady hands and shining eyes. The pastor cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved." Clara barely heard the traditional words. Her attention was fixed on the man beside her, on the way his Adam's apple bobbed when he repeated his vows, on the faint tremor in his fingers as he slid a simple gold band onto her finger, on the single tear that tracked through the dust on his cheek when she promised to love him. "I now pronounce you man and wife." Cyrus didn't wait for permission. He cupped her face in his work-roughened hands and kissed her, not some chaste peck for show, but a real kiss, full of all the words they hadn't said yet. Clara's knees went weak. Jed hooped. The pastor chuckled. Outside, the wind carried the sound of horses nickering in the churchyard, as if even they approved. When they pulled apart, Cyrus kept his forehead pressed to hers. "Mrs. Halstead," he whispered, like it was the sweetest name he'd ever heard. Clara laughed, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Take me home, husband." And he did, not to some grand house filled with servants, but to the same modest porch where she'd first brought him, broken and bleeding, all those weeks ago. Only now, the door swung open to reveal a table set for two, wildflowers in a mason jar, and a single candle burning bright against the gathering dusk. Cyrus lifted her over the threshold, his arms strong around her. "Welcome home, Clara." As night fell over the Halstead ranch, wrapping them in its quiet peace, Clara knew one truth with absolute certainty. She hadn't just saved this man's life. He'd saved hers too. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the Halstead ranch as Clara stepped onto the porch, her bare feet curling against the weathered wood. 6 weeks had passed since the wedding, yet every sunrise still felt like a gift. She breathed in the crisp autumn air, watching her breath form little clouds before her. The ranch was alive with activity, Jed whistling as he led horses to pasture, ranch hands calling to each other across the yard, the rhythmic thump of the butter churn coming from the kitchen behind her. Cyrus appeared at her side, pressing a steaming mug of coffee into her hands. "Morning, Mrs. Halstead." The way he said her name still sent warmth flooding through her chest. "Morning yourself," she murmured, leaning into his side. His arm came around her shoulders, solid and sure. Down by the main gate, 2 workers were hammering at something. Clara squinted against the sunlight. What are they doing? Cyrus's lips curved. "Come see." Hand in hand, they walked down the dirt path toward the entrance. As they approached, Clara's steps faltered. There, in freshly painted letters, the ranch gate now read, "Halstead and Clara." Her throat tightened. "Cyrus." He turned to face her, his work-roughened hands framing her face. "This was never just my land. Not since the day you brought me home." Tears pricked Clara's eyes as she traced the letters with her fingertips. How far they'd come, from a dusty train platform to this. The man who'd once been a stranger now knew the way she took her coffee, the way she hummed when she needed bread, the way her nose scrunched when she laughed. And she knew him, the real him, not the wealthy rancher from the letters, but the man who rose before dawn to check on a sick calf, who secretly left wildflowers on her pillow, whose hands shook when he talked about that day on the train. Jed ambled up, tipping his hat. "Looks good, don't it?" Clara could only nod. The rest of the day passed in the comfortable rhythm they'd built together. Clara in the garden, Cyrus mending fences, both of them meeting on the porch at midday to share lunch and stolen kisses. As evening fell, Clara set the table with her mother's china, the same set she'd carried west in her trunk, waiting for a home worthy of it. Cyrus washed up at the basin, watching her move about the kitchen with quiet wonder. "You know," he said suddenly, "I used to think this ranch was my legacy." Clara turned, a loaf of fresh bread in her hands. "And now I know better." He crossed the room, his hands settling at her waist. "Our legacy ain't the land, Clara. It's this. You and me. The life we're building." Outside, the wind rustled through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of earth and home. Clara pressed her forehead against her husband's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She had arrived in Wyoming expecting to be a rancher's wife. Instead, she'd become Clara Halstead, woman who rescued strangers, who tended the sick, who planted gardens and mended fences, and loved with her whole heart. And as Cyrus kissed her there in their warm kitchen, surrounded by the life they'd made together, Clara knew one truth with absolute certainty. She was exactly where she was meant to be. Did you love Clara and Cyrus' story? Like this chapter if it touched your heart. Want more inspiring tales of faith, love, and second chances? Subscribe for more heartfelt stories that remind us all of God's perfect timing. Share your favorite moment in the comments below. We'd love to hear what spoke to you most in this journey. "For I know the plans I have for you," declares the Lord. "Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future." Jeremiah 29 verse 11.